I smoothed the silk of my purple dress one final time, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror of my Mercedes. The woman staring back at me looked composed, successful, even silver hair pulled into an elegant chignon, diamond earrings catching the afternoon light. At 62, I'd learned to armor myself in designer clothing and quiet confidence. But beneath the polished exterior, my stomach churned with an emotion I refused to name. Don't expect anything, I told myself. The same mantra I'd whispered for months. Just get through today. The valet took my keys with a polite nod, and I walked toward the entrance of the Willowbrook Country Club, my heels clicking against the marble steps. Through the glass doors, I could see the wedding reception already in full swing. Crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables draped in ivory linens. Guests laughing over champagne flutes. The soft melody of a string quartet floating through the air. My daughter Hannah's wedding. The wedding I'd paid for. I paused at the entrance, watching through the glass as she glided across the dance floor in her $8,000 Vera Wang gown. The one I'd written the check for after she'd called me in tears, saying her fiancé's family couldn't afford the dress of her dreams. She looked radiant, her auburn hair swept up in an elaborate updo, her smile bright as she accepted congratulations from guests I didn't recognize. She looks happy, I thought. And for a moment, that was enough. For a moment, I could forget the months of silence, the unreturned phone calls, the way she'd handed me the wedding invitation like an afterthought 3 weeks ago. Mom, I know it's last minute, but things have been so crazy with the planning, she'd said, not meeting my eyes. The reception starts at 6 o'clock. No mention of the ceremony, no role in the wedding party, no acknowledgement that I'd been relegated to the reception, a guest at my own daughter's wedding. After funding nearly every detail of her perfect day, I pushed through the doors and was immediately greeted by a hostess with a tablet and a practiced smile. Name, please? Cora Phillips, I said, watching her scroll through the guest list. Her brow furrowed slightly.
I'm sorry.
I don't see you on the seating chart. Are you sure you're? I'm the mother of the bride? I said quietly. The hostess's eyes widened, and she fumbled with her tablet. Oh, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Phillips. Let me just… There must be some mistake. But there wasn't a mistake. I could see it in her nervous glances, in the way she kept scrolling and re-scrolling the same list. My name wasn't there. After 37 years of raising Hannah, after the sleepless nights when she was colicky, after the dance recitals and soccer games and parent-teacher conferences, after the college tuition and the down payment on her first apartment, after the $75,000 I'd quietly transferred to her account for this wedding, I wasn't important enough for a seat assignment. Don't worry about it, I told the hostess, whose face had gone pale. I'll find somewhere to stand. I made my way into the reception hall, weaving between tables filled with laughing guests. The place cards were elegant, hand-calligraphed names on cream cardstock, each one marking someone's place in my daughter's new life. I recognized some faces from her college years, others from her job at the marketing firm. Her new in-laws occupied a prominent table near the dance floor, beaming with pride. And there, at the head, sat Hannah with her new husband, Norman, surrounded by the bridal party, 8 bridesmaids in dusty rows, 8 groomsmen in charcoal gray, people she'd known for months, some for mere weeks, all deemed more important than the woman who'd given her life. I found myself gravitating toward the back of the room near the bar, where the lighting was dimmer and the crowd thinner. A server offered me champagne, and I accepted it gratefully, needing something to do with my hands. Excuse me, I said to another server who was arranging appetizers on a nearby table. I was wondering about the seating arrangement. I'm Ka Phillips, Hannah's mother. The young man looked confused.
I'm sorry, Mum.
I just handle the food service. You need to speak with the wedding planner about seating. But I knew I wouldn't find the wedding planner, a woman named Beverly, who'd been calling me for months about payments and deposits, but had apparently never been told to reserve a seat for the person writing the checks. I sipped my champagne and watched my daughter dance with her new husband, their faces glowing with happiness. The photographer circled them like a satellite, capturing every smile, every tender moment. I realized they'd probably already taken the family photos before the reception while I was still at home getting ready for an event where I apparently didn't belong. Mom, I turned to find Hannah approaching, her wedding dress rustling softly against the marble floor. Up close, I could see the slight tension around her eyes, the way she kept glancing back toward her new husband. I was wondering where you were, she said, though her tone suggested she'd been hoping I wouldn't come at all. I was looking for my table, I said simply. A flush crept up her neck.
Oh, that.
Listen, Mom. There was a mix-up with the seating chart. We had to make some last-minute adjustments, and she gestured vaguely toward the room. Try not to ruin anything, okay? You should feel honored just to be here. The words hit me like a physical blow. You should feel honored just to be here at my own daughter's wedding. The wedding I'd paid for.
I sætter her.
This woman I'd raised. This stranger in white silk who spoke to me like I was an inconvenience. The champagne flute trembled slightly in my hand. Honored, I repeated softly. Yes, she said, her voice gaining strength. I mean, I know things have been complicated between us lately, but this is my day, Mom. My perfect day. And I just need you to… She paused, searching for the right words. I need you to not make it about you, not make it about me. As if asking for a seat at my daughter's wedding was somehow selfish. As if 37 years of motherhood had earned me nothing more than the privilege of standing in the shadows. Of course, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. I wouldn't dream of making your day about me. She smiled, then the first genuine smile she'd given me in months. Thank you. I knew you'd understand. But as she turned to walk away, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a white flag of surrender, I realized I understood nothing at all. I understood that I'd raised a daughter who saw me as nothing more than a checkbook with legs. I understood that I'd spent decades building a successful business, fighting for respect in boardrooms filled with men who underestimated me, only to be dismissed by my own child. I understood that I'd been playing a game where the rules had changed and no one had bothered to tell me. I finished my champagne and set the empty glass on a nearby table, my hands steady now. Around me, the reception continued. Laughter and music and clinking glasses. The celebration of a new beginning that had no place for the woman who'd made it all possible. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A text message from my assistant. Forbes photographer wants to confirm tomorrow's shoot. Cover story going to print Monday. I stared at the message, then at my daughter, who is now posing for photos with her bridesmaids. 8 women in dusty rows, arms linked, smiling for the camera. My daughter in the center, radiant and beautiful and completely oblivious to the storm building. And the woman who'd given her everything, the woman on the cover of Forbes, the entrepreneur who'd built a textile empire from nothing, the mother who'd just been told she should feel honored to stand in the shadows of her own daughter's wedding. I slipped my phone back into my clutch and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the marble floor with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. But as I reached the door, I stopped, turned back, and looked at the scene one more time. The crystal and flowers and elegant table settings, the guests who'd been deemed worthy of seats, while I stood like a stranger in the back of the room. Tomorrow, I thought, everyone will know exactly who Ka Phillips is. The question was, would my daughter be ready for that conversation?
Part 2.
I didn't leave. Something rooted me to that marble floor. Some instinct I'd developed over 4 decades of business negotiations. The ability to sense when the tide was about to turn. Instead, I walked back toward the bar, ordered another champagne, and positioned myself where I could observe the room with the calculating eye of a woman who'd built an empire by reading people, understanding their weaknesses, and knowing exactly when to strike. The bartender, a young man with kind eyes, leaned forward slightly. "Everything all right, ma'am?" "Perfect," I said and meant it, because for the first time in months, I could see the situation clearly. My daughter had made a choice to humiliate me publicly, to treat me like a burden, to reduce 37 years of motherhood to an inconvenience, and choices I'd learned in business always had consequences. I watched Hannah glide between tables, accepting congratulations, her hand possessively on Norman's arm. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never truly faced hardship, never wondered where her next meal would come from, Never stayed up nights calculating how to make payroll. Everything she had, her education, her apartment, her designer wardrobe, this wedding, had been handed to her on a silver platter that I'd provided. Cora. A voice beside me made me turn. Cora Phillips. I thought that was you. I recognized him immediately. Harold Gates, the business correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. We'd done several interviews over the years as my company, Phillips Industries, had grown from a small textile operation into a major player in sustainable manufacturing. Harold, I said, extending my hand. I didn't expect to see you here. My wife's cousin, he said, nodding toward the dance floor. She's one of the bridesmaids. But I have to say, I'm more interested in talking to you. That Forbes cover story is incredible. The Quiet Revolution, how Cora Phillips reinvented American manufacturing. It hits newsstands Monday, right? I saw several heads turn at the mention of Forbes in a room full of marketing executives and young professionals. That word carried weight. Yes, I said simply. It's been an interesting year. Interesting is an understatement. Tripling your revenue, opening 6 new facilities, that partnership with the EU Sustainability Initiative. You're basically rewriting the rulebook for ethical manufacturing. Harold's enthusiasm was genuine, and I could see more people starting to listen. I heard rumors about the IPO. Any truth to that? The IPO. I'd been keeping that close to my chest, but the preliminary paperwork was already filed. My company, valued at just under $500 million, was going public within the year. It would make me one of the wealthiest women in the state, if not the region. We're exploring options, I said carefully. But I could see the ripple effect of Harold's words moving through the nearby guests. Forbes cover, IPO, $500 million.
Mom.
Hannah's voice cut through the conversation. She'd appeared at my elbow, her smile strained. What are you doing? Having a conversation, I said evenly. Harold, I'd like you to meet my daughter, Hannah. Hannah, this is Harold Gates from the Wall Street Journal. Harold's face lit up. Your daughter? How wonderful. You must be so proud of your mother's achievements. I watched Hannah's face carefully. She was good at hiding her reactions. I'd taught her that, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She'd been so busy keeping me at arm's length, so focused on her new life and her new husband, that she'd missed the fact that her mother had become something of a celebrity in business circles. Oh, yes, Hannah said, her voice tight. Very proud. I imagine you are, Harold continued, oblivious to the tension. I mean, Forbes doesn't just put anyone on their cover. Your mother is revolutionizing an entire industry. The environmental impact alone. Excuse me, a new voice interrupted. I turned to see a man in his 50s approaching, immaculately dressed with the kind of confidence that came from serious money. Are you Cora Phillips? Before I could answer, Harold jumped in. Richard, meet Cora Phillips. Cora, this is Richard Blackwood. He runs the Blackwood Foundation. Richard Blackwood. I knew the name. One of the largest philanthropic organizations in the country focused on environmental causes. His foundation had assets worth over $2 billion. Ms. Phillips, Richard said, extending his hand. I've been hoping to meet you. Your work with sustainable manufacturing is exactly what we're looking for in our next major initiative. I was actually planning to reach out to your office next week. I shook his hand, acutely aware of the growing circle of people around us. I'd be interested in hearing more. We're launching a $200 million fund to support companies that are genuinely changing how America manufactures. Based on everything I've read, Phillips Industries would be a perfect fit for our first major investment. $200 million. The number hung in the air like a challenge. I could feel Hannah's eyes on me, could sense her confusion turning to something else, recognition perhaps, or the first stirrings of understanding. That's very generous, I said. I'd be happy to discuss it. Wonderful. I'll have my assistant call yours tomorrow. Richard glanced around the room. I have to say, this is an interesting place to run into you. Friend of the family? Before I could answer, Hannah stepped forward.
She's my mother, she said.
And for the first time all evening, there was something that might have been pride in her voice. Your mother? Richard's smile grew wider. How wonderful. You must be incredibly proud. Yes, Hannah said, but I could hear the uncertainty underneath. Very proud. More people were gravitating toward our group now. The mention of Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, the Blackwood Foundation, it was like a magnet for every ambitious professional in the room. I found myself at the center of a growing circle, answering questions about my business, my philosophy, my plans for the future. The key, I was saying to a group of marketing executives, is understanding that sustainability isn't just good for the environment, it's good for business. When you reduce waste, when you create efficient systems, when you treat your employees well, you don't just save money. You create loyalty, you build something that lasts. I could see my son-in-law Norman hovering at the edge of the group, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. He'd married Hannah, thinking he was getting a wife with a comfortable middle-class background. He had no idea he'd married into serious money. "Miss Phillips," said a young woman I didn't recognize. "I work in sustainable investing. Could I give you my card?" "Of course," I said, accepting the card graciously. Then another and another. Within minutes, I had a stack of business cards from people eager to work with me, invest with me, learn from me. "I can't believe you're here," said a man in his 30s. "I actually wrote my MBA thesis on Phillips Industries. Your transformation of the old Hamilton textile plant was brilliant, keeping the workforce, retraining them, increasing their wages while still improving efficiency." I smiled, remembering that particular challenge. When you respect your employees, they respect the work. "It's not complicated, but it is revolutionary," Harold interjected. "Most companies would have simply closed the plant and moved operations overseas. You proved that American manufacturing could be both profitable and ethical." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Hannah standing with Norman, their heads close together in urgent conversation. She kept glancing toward our group, and I could see her trying to process what she was witnessing. Her mother, the woman she just told should feel honored to be here, was suddenly the most important person in the room. "The IPO," Richard was saying. "When will you be going public?" "Early next year," I said. "We're still working through the details." I'd love to be part of that conversation. The foundation has been looking for opportunities to invest in publicly traded companies that align with our values. Another number hung in the air, not stated, but implied. Richard Blackwood didn't make small investments. When the Blackwood Foundation bought shares, they bought in blocks of 50 million or more. The circle around me had grown to include nearly a quarter of the wedding guests. The bride's table, I noticed, was looking rather empty. Even some of the bridesmaids had drifted over to listen to the conversation. "Mom," Hannah's voice was small now, uncertain. She'd appeared at my elbow again, but this time she wasn't demanding I stay quiet. This time she was asking for my attention. I turned to her with the same polite smile I'd given Harold, Richard, and all the others. "Yes, dear. Can I speak with you for a moment privately?" I glanced at the group around me, business leaders, investors, journalists, all hanging on my words. Then I looked at my daughter, who was finally beginning to understand exactly who she'd just humiliated. "Of course," I said. "If you'll excuse me for a moment," I told the group, "I need to speak with my daughter." But as I followed Hannah toward a quieter corner of the room, I caught Richard's eye. He was watching me with the kind of expression I'd seen countless times in boardrooms, the look of someone who just realized they were dealing with a much more formidable opponent than they'd initially thought. The question was no longer whether my daughter would be ready for tomorrow's conversation. The question was whether she'd be ready for the conversation we were about to have right now. Part 3. Hannah led me to a small alcove near the French doors that opened onto the country club's terrace. The space was partially hidden by an elaborate floral arrangement. White peonies and roses that had cost me $3,000, though I doubted she remembered that detail. Her wedding dress rustled as she turned to face me, and in the softer lighting, I could see something I hadn't noticed before. Fear. "Mom," she began, her voice carefully controlled. "I had no idea that all those people would know you." "Why would you?" I asked simply. "You haven't returned my calls in 3 months." She flinched at that, but recovered quickly. "I've been busy with wedding planning. You know how it is." "Actually, I don't," I said. "I eloped with your father in a courthouse in 1982. We had dinner at Denny's afterward. I paused, letting that sink in. But then again, we were paying for our own wedding. The color drained from her face. Mom, about the money? What about it? I want you to know how grateful I am. We both are. She gestured vaguely toward where Norman stood near the head table, still looking shell-shocked. The house down payment, the wedding, everything. It's just what? She struggled for words, and I watched her with the detached interest of someone observing a fascinating psychological experiment. This was my daughter, the child I'd raised to be strong and independent, reduced to stammering because she'd finally encountered a situation where her usual tactics wouldn't work. I didn't realize you were so successful, she said finally. Successful. I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? The Forbes cover, the IPO talk, that foundation man offering you millions. Mom, why didn't you tell me? I studied her face carefully. When would I have told you? During one of our phone conversations that never happened, or perhaps at one of the family dinners you never attended. I invited you to dinner last month. You invited me to babysit your friend's children while you and Norman went to dinner. There's a difference. She had the grace to look ashamed, but I wasn't finished. For the past year, Hannah, every conversation we've had has been about what you needed. Money for the wedding dress, money for the venue deposit, money for the honeymoon, money for the house down payment. I kept my voice level, professional. At what point in those conversations did you think to ask how I was doing, what was happening in my life, whether the woman writing all those checks might have something interesting to share? You never said. I never said what? That I was building something? That I was working 18-hour days to create jobs for 3,000 people? That I was being courted by every major investment firm on the East Coast? I paused. Or did you simply not think it was important? The silence stretched between us, filled with the distant sound of laughter and music from the reception. I could see Norman approaching cautiously, his face a mask of diplomatic concern. Everything okay over here? He asked, his voice carrying the false cheer of someone trying to diffuse a situation they didn't understand. Norman, I said pleasantly. Congratulations on the wedding. It's lovely. Thank you, Mrs. Phillips. And thank you again for everything. He gestured around the elegant venue. This is all so much more than we could have afforded. Yes, I said. It is. Something in my tone made him look uncertain. We really do appreciate it. All of it. The house, the honeymoon, everything. The honeymoon, I repeated thoughtfully. Remind me, where are you going? Italy, Hannah said quickly. 2 weeks in Tuscany, then Rome. That villa you found for us looks incredible. The Villa San Lorenzo. I nodded. 17th century. Recently restored. Beautiful property. We can't wait, Norman added. I've never been to Europe. I smiled. How wonderful for you. They exchanged glances, sensing something but not quite understanding what. Behind them, I could see Harold Gates approaching with his phone out, probably wanting a photo for his column. Mrs. Phillips, Harold called. Sorry to interrupt, but could I get a quick photo? I'm writing a piece about unexpected encounters, and meeting the Forbes cover story at a wedding is too good to pass up. Of course, I said, stepping away from Hannah and Norman. Harold positioned me near the floral arrangement, the soft light flattering. Perfect. Now, can you tell me a bit about what brings you here tonight? I looked directly at Hannah as I answered. I'm here to celebrate my daughter's wedding. After all, I wanted to see how she'd use the gifts I've given her. Gifts, the wedding, of course, the house down payment, the honeymoon. I paused. All the opportunities I've provided. Harold nodded, scribbling notes. And how does it feel to see your daughter starting this new chapter? Educational, I said simply. After Harold left, I turned back to Hannah and Norman, who were standing frozen like deer in headlights. Mom, Hannah said carefully, what did you mean by how I'd use the gifts? Just what I said. I've been curious to see how you'd handle the opportunities I've given you. I adjusted my bracelet, a simple gesture that somehow felt weighted with meaning. For instance, I was interested to see whether you'd include me in your wedding celebration, or whether you'd treat me like an unwelcome stranger. You're not unwelcome. Really? I raised an eyebrow. Because when I arrived tonight, I discovered that the mother of the bride wasn't important enough for a seat assignment. That was illuminating. Norman cleared his throat. There might have been a mix-up with the seating chart. There was no mix-up, I said gently. There was a choice. And choices, I've learned, reveal character. I could see Hannah's mind working, calculating, trying to figure out how to navigate this conversation. She'd always been quick that way, clever enough to manipulate situations to her advantage. But she'd never had to manage a situation where she wasn't holding the cards. What do you want me to say? She asked finally. That I'm sorry, that I should have handled things differently? I don't want you to say anything, I replied. I want you to understand something.
What?
That every gift comes with a relationship. Every opportunity comes with respect. And when you take the gifts but discard the relationship, when you accept the opportunities but withhold the respect. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Well, that tells me everything I need to know about your character. The music from the reception seemed louder now, more jarring against the tension in our small alcove. I could see other guests beginning to notice our absence, particularly Richard Blackwood, who was scanning the room with the focused attention of someone looking for a specific person. Mrs. Phillips. A server appeared at my elbow. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a gentleman asking for you. Says it's about a business matter. I glanced past him to see Richard Blackwood approaching, his expression serious. Cora, he said, nodding politely to Hannah and Norman. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Not at all, I said smoothly. I wanted to follow up on our conversation. I've been thinking about that partnership opportunity, and I'd like to propose something more substantial than I initially mentioned. Oh, the Blackwood Foundation is prepared to offer a strategic investment of $300 million in Phillips Industries, contingent on a few conditions. He paused, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. We're talking about a full partnership, joint ventures in sustainable manufacturing, international expansion, the works, $300 million. I heard Hannah's sharp intake of breath and saw Norman's eyes widen. That's very generous, I said. What sort of conditions? Nothing onerous, due diligence, of course. Board representation, and we'd want to ensure that your company culture remains intact, the employee satisfaction metrics, the environmental standards, the community involvement, he smiled. Essentially, we want to make sure you stay exactly who I am, I repeated thoughtfully. A leader who values integrity above profit. Someone who builds rather than exploits. The kind of business owner who treats people with respect and expects the same in return. I felt the words land like stones in still water, their ripples spreading outward to touch everything around us. Richard had just described exactly the kind of person I'd tried to teach my daughter to be, and exactly the kind of person she'd failed to see in me. I appreciate the offer, I said. Let me consider it. Of course, but I should mention we're hoping to move quickly. The board meets next Friday, and if you're interested, we could have preliminary agreements in place by the following week. Another pause, another weight dropping into the silence. Next Friday, I said. That's interesting timing. Is there a conflict? I looked at Hannah, who was staring at me with something approaching panic in her eyes. Not a conflict exactly, but next Friday is when my daughter and her husband are supposed to fly to Italy for their honeymoon. Supposed to? Richard looked confused. Well, I said carefully, that depends on whether certain travel arrangements remain in place. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the reception music seemed to fade into background noise as the implications of my words settled over the small group. Hannah's face had gone pale. Mom, what are you saying? But before I could answer, Harold Gates appeared again, this time with his camera ready. Cora, I hate to impose, but could I get a photo of you with your daughter for the human interest angle? I looked at Hannah, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. Of course, I said, though I suspect this might be a very memorable photograph. Part 4. Harold positioned us near the reception entrance where the lighting was perfect and the elegant backdrop would photograph well. I stood beside my daughter, my arm around her waist in a gesture that would appear maternal and loving to anyone who didn't know better. Hannah's smile was frozen in place, her body rigid with tension that only I could feel. Beautiful, Harold said, snapping several shots. The Forbes cover CEO and her daughter at the wedding she funded. This is going to make a wonderful story. The wedding she funded. I felt Hannah's sharp intake of breath. I saw Norman's face go pale behind Harold's shoulder. Of course, they'd assumed I would be discreet about the financial arrangements. They'd counted on my maternal instinct to protect them from embarrassment. They'd miscalculated. One more, Harold said, adjusting his angle. Cora, could you tell me how it feels to be celebrating your daughter's success while your own career is reaching such heights? I looked directly at Hannah as I answered. It's fascinating to see how people respond to opportunity. Some rise to meet it with grace and gratitude. Others, I paused, letting the silence stretch. Well, others reveal their true character. True character. Success isn't just about what you achieve, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the reception hall. Several nearby guests had stopped their conversations to listen. It's about how you treat the people who helped you get there. Whether you remember where you came from, whether you honor the relationships that made your achievements possible. Harold was writing furiously, sensing a story beneath the surface. That's beautifully put. I imagine your daughter has been a great source of pride as you've built your empire. My daughter, I said carefully, has been educational. More heads were turning now. I could see Richard Blackwood approaching along with several other business leaders who'd been drawn by the sound of Harold's interview. The bride's reception was rapidly becoming a business networking event centered around the woman who'd been deemed unworthy of a seat. Educational how? Harold pressed. I felt Hannah's fingernails digging into my arm, a silent plea for discretion. I looked down at her, this beautiful young woman in her expensive gown, surrounded by the luxury I'd provided, and felt nothing but cold clarity. Well, I said, for instance, I've learned that some people view generosity as an entitlement rather than a gift. They accept financial support, educational opportunities, property investments, wedding funding. I gestured around the elegant venue, but they forget that these things come from someone who loves them, someone who deserves basic respect and inclusion in return. The growing crowd around us had gone silent. Harold's pen had stopped moving. Even the string quartet seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, their music growing softer. That's a powerful lesson, Harold said carefully. Yes, I agreed. And sometimes the teacher learns as much as the student. Richard Blackwood stepped forward then, his business instincts apparently overriding social convention. Cora, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to mention something about that partnership we discussed. Of course, Richard. The timeline is actually more flexible than I initially indicated. If you needed to travel for any reason, family obligations, personal matters, we could accommodate that. He glanced meaningfully at Hannah. Family is important. We understand that business sometimes has to wait. I smiled. How thoughtful. Though I should mention that my calendar is quite flexible at the moment. You see, I was planning to take some time off next week to visit Italy. Italy? Harold's journalistic antenna twitched. Business or pleasure? Well, I had planned to visit a property I own there, the Villa San Lorenzo in Tuscany, 17th century, recently restored. I paused, savoring the moment. But those plans have become uncertain. Hannah's grip on my arm tightened to the point of pain. I could see understanding dawning in her eyes, along with something that might have been panic. Uncertain? Richard asked. Property management can be complicated, I said smoothly. Sometimes you make arrangements for people to use your homes, and then you discover that perhaps they haven't earned that privilege. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, sensing the drama unfolding in their midst. Mom, Hannah whispered, her voice barely audible. I turned to her with the same pleasant smile I'd been wearing all evening. Yes, dear? Could we talk privately for a moment? Of course. Though I should mention that Richard and I were just about to discuss some exciting developments. I looked back at the gathering crowd. You see, everyone, my company is about to go public. We're looking at a valuation of approximately $500 million. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Harold was scribbling frantically again. $500 million, someone breathed. Conservative estimate, I said. And with Richard's foundation potentially investing another $300 million, we're talking about the kind of expansion that creates thousands of jobs and transforms entire communities. That's incredible, Harold said. Your daughter must be proud. I'm sure she is. After all, this success means I'll be able to continue being generous with my family, assuming, of course, that they demonstrate the kind of character that deserves such generosity. I could see Norman now standing at the edge of the crowd, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. He was beginning to understand what I was really saying, that their honeymoon, their house, their entire comfortable future depended on my continued goodwill. Goodwill that was rapidly evaporating. The thing about success, I continued, my voice carrying easily through the silent room, is that it gives you choices. You can choose to share your good fortune with people who value you, who respect you, who treat you as family rather than as a mere transaction. And if they don't? Harold asked, completely caught up in the story now. Then you learn to make different choices. Richard stepped closer, his expression intense. Cora, about that timeline. If you needed to make any adjustments to your personal arrangements, we could work around those adjustments. I repeated thoughtfully. Yes, I imagine I might need to make some adjustments. I could see the wedding planner, Beverly, hovering at the edge of the crowd, her face pale with confusion. She probably couldn't understand how the reception had transformed from a celebration into what was essentially a public relations event for the woman she'd forgotten to seat, Mrs. Phillips. Beverly approached hesitantly. I'm so sorry about the seating confusion earlier. If you'd like, I could set up a special table. That won't be necessary, I said. I think I've seen everything I needed to see. The words hung in the air like a judgment. Around us, the cream of the city's business community watched with fascination as family drama unfolded in real time. This would be talked about in boardrooms and country clubs for months. The night Cora Phillips publicly revealed her daughter's true character. Actually, I said, turning back to Richard, I think next Friday would be perfect for that board meeting. I'll have nothing else requiring my attention. Hannah made a small sound that might have been a sob. Wonderful, Richard said, oblivious to the undercurrents. Should I have my assistant coordinate with yours? Absolutely. In fact, I think this partnership could be exactly what Phillips Industries needs to reach the next level. I paused, looking around the room at all the eager faces. It's amazing how much clearer your vision becomes when you stop letting personal relationships cloud your business judgment. Personal relationships? Harold leaned forward. Sometimes, I said carefully, you realize that the people you've been trying to help don't actually want help. They want handouts. They don't want a relationship. They want a transaction. And once you understand that distinction, decision-making becomes much simpler. I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on me, the anticipation of everyone present. They sensed they were witnessing something significant, though most of them couldn't quite grasp what. But Hannah understood. I could see it in her face, the dawning realization that her mother wasn't just successful, she was formidable. The quiet woman who'd been writing checks without complaint had been building an empire while being treated like an inconvenience. The beautiful thing about owning your own company, I continued, is that you get to decide how to use your resources. Who deserves your investment? Who has earned your trust? I smiled. Who gets to benefit from your success? Norman stepped forward then, his voice tight with barely controlled desperation. Mrs. Phillips, I think there might be some misunderstanding. Oh, I don't think there's any misunderstanding at all, I said gently. I think everything has been perfectly clear. Harold looked up from his notes. This sounds like it could be quite a story. Family business, generational success, the complexities of wealth. Yes, I agreed. I think it could be quite a story indeed. And as I stood there surrounded by the business elite of the city, wearing my elegant dress and my quiet confidence, like armor, I realized that the story was just beginning. The question was no longer whether my daughter would learn to respect me. The question was whether she would learn in time to save herself.
Part 5.
But time, as I'd learned in 4 decades of business, was the one resource you couldn't buy back. Mom. Hannah's voice cracked as she stepped closer, her wedding dress rustling with desperation. Please, can we just talk privately for 5 minutes? I looked at her. Really looked at her. This woman who'd emerged from my body 32 years ago, who'd taken her first steps holding my fingers, who'd called me crying from college when her first boyfriend broke her heart. Somewhere along the way, that little girl had become a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a source of funding. 5 minutes, I agreed, but not privately. Her face went white. What do you mean? I mean that everything I have to say can be said in front of witnesses. I gestured to the crowd around us. After all, these people seem far more interested in my thoughts and accomplishments than my own family has been. Richard Blackwood stepped forward, his businessman's instincts apparently warring with his social awareness. Perhaps I should give you some space. Not at all, I said firmly. In fact, Richard, I think now would be an excellent time to finalize our partnership details. As I mentioned, my calendar has just become remarkably clear. Your calendar? Harold's pen was poised, sensing the climax of whatever story was unfolding.
Yes.
You see, I had been planning to spend considerable time this year helping my daughter and her husband settle into their new life, supporting their endeavors, ensuring they had everything they needed. I paused, savoring the weight of what came next. But I've realized that my energy and resources might be better invested elsewhere. Mom, you can't. Hannah started. Can't what? I asked, my voice sharp enough to cut. Can't make decisions about my own money. Can't choose how to spend my own time. Can't decide who deserves my generosity. The reception hall had gone completely silent. Even the staff had stopped moving, sensing the drama playing out before them. That's not what I meant, Hannah said, tears starting in her eyes. You're my mother. Yes, I said quietly. I am. I'm the woman who worked 16-hour days to pay for your private school education. I'm the woman who mortgaged her first house to send you to college. I'm the woman who gave you the down payment for your home, who funded this entire wedding, who planned to give you the honeymoon of your dreams. My voice remained steady, professional. I'm also the woman you told should feel honored just to be here. The sharp intake of breath from the crowd was audible. Harold was writing so fast his pen was practically smoking. I didn't mean it like that, Hannah whispered. How did you mean it? I was stressed. I wasn't thinking.
No, interrupte.
You were thinking perfectly clearly. You were thinking that I was an inconvenience to be managed, a burden to be tolerated, a checkbook with legs who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you threw my way. Norman stepped forward then, his face flushed with embarrassment and growing panic. Mrs. Phillips, please, we can work this out. Work what out, Norman? I turned to him with genuine curiosity. What exactly are you proposing? We could fix the seating arrangement, make announcements, give you the recognition you deserve. The recognition I deserve? I laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Norman, I don't need recognition from my daughter's wedding guests. I get recognition from Forbes magazine, from the Wall Street Journal, from business leaders who understand what I've built. Richard nodded emphatically. Cora, I hope you know that the Blackwood Foundation holds you in the highest regard. I do know that, Richard, and I appreciate it. I looked back at Norman. What I don't appreciate is being treated like a charity case by people who've been living on my charity. The words hit like physical blows. I watched Hannah's face crumple and saw Norman's hands clench at his sides. So, here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Norman, your honeymoon reservations at the Villa San Lorenzo have been canceled. The property will be occupied by a different family next week, one that actually appreciates hospitality. You can't, he started. I can, and I have. It's my villa. I turned to Hannah. The house you and Norman are living in, the one where I provided the down payment. I'll be calling the bank tomorrow to discuss the loan arrangements. Hannah's face went ashen. That's our home. It's a house you couldn't afford without my help. And since you've made it clear that my help is something you take for granted rather than something you value, I shrugged. Well, I've decided to redirect my financial support to more appreciative recipients. Harold was practically vibrating with excitement. This is incredible. The Forbes cover CEO withdrawing support from her own daughter over treatment at the wedding she funded. Not withdrawing support, I corrected. Redirecting investment. You see, Harold, I've spent the last year being treated like an ATM by people who should love me. And I've realized that my money, my success, can do far more good when it's invested in people who actually deserve it. Richard leaned forward eagerly. The foundation would be honored to help you identify worthy recipients. I already have some in mind, I said. My employees, for instance, the 3,000 people who helped build Phillips Industries into what it is today. They've earned bonuses, expanded benefits, and educational opportunities for their children. I paused. They've earned these things because they've shown loyalty, respect, and genuine appreciation for the opportunities I've provided. The contrast was clear to everyone present. My employees, strangers really, had earned what my own daughter had taken for granted. Mom, Hannah's voice was barely a whisper now.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. You didn't realize what? That I'm a person with feelings? That I deserve basic respect? That generosity isn't the same as obligation. I shook my head. Hannah, I raised you to be better than this. I can be better, she said desperately. Give me another chance. Another chance? I looked around the room at all the faces watching us. Hannah, I've been giving you chances for 32 years. I gave you a chance when you stopped calling. I gave you a chance when you treated me like hired help instead of family. I gave you a chance tonight when I arrived at this reception. My voice grew quieter, more final. You used that chance to tell me I should feel honored just to be here. The silence that followed was profound. I could see wedding guests trying to process what they were witnessing, the complete unraveling of a family relationship in real time. Richard, I said, turning back to the foundation president, shall we schedule that board meeting for next Friday afternoon? I think 2 o'clock would work well. Absolutely, he said, pulling out his phone. My assistant will coordinate with yours. Excellent. And Harold, I hope you'll include in your article the fact that Phillips Industries will be announcing several new charitable initiatives next week. We'll be establishing scholarship funds, employee ownership programs, and community development projects. I smiled. When you have resources, you should use them to lift up people who've earned that support. Harold nodded enthusiastically. This is going to be front-page business section. Fortune 500 CEO chooses employees over entitled family. That's not quite the angle I'd take, I said mildly. I prefer successful entrepreneur invests in people who share her values. Behind me, I could hear Hannah crying now, quiet, desperate sobs that might have moved me 6 months ago. But I'd spent too many nights wondering why my own daughter couldn't be bothered to return my calls. Too many holidays eating alone while she made excuses. Too many milestones celebrated in solitude while she pursued her own interests. Mrs. Phillips, Beverly, the wedding planner, approached hesitantly. About the final payment for tonight's event has been made in full, I said, along with a generous gratuity for your staff. They've done excellent work tonight, but the couple was supposed to handle the final. The couple, I said, looking directly at Hannah, apparently had other priorities. I turned back to the gathering crowd, most of whom were still watching with fascination. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for helping me celebrate this very educational evening. I hope you'll remember that success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about how you treat the people who help you achieve it. I paused. And I hope you'll remember that respect is earned, not inherited. With that, I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the marble floor with a rhythm of finality. Behind me, I could hear Hannah calling my name. I could hear Norman's desperate attempts to salvage something from the wreckage of their evening. But I didn't look back. Outside, the valet brought my Mercedes around, and I settled into the leather seat with a sense of completion I hadn't felt in years. My phone was already buzzing with messages, interview requests, business opportunities, and invitations to events where I would be welcomed as an honored guest rather than tolerated as an obligation. Tomorrow, the Forbes cover would hit newsstands, and the world would see Cora Phillips as she really was, not just a successful businesswoman, but a woman who understood her worth and demanded the respect she'd earned. As I drove away from the country club, leaving my daughter's reception behind, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: freedom. The freedom that comes from finally understanding that love without respect is worthless, that generosity without gratitude is waste, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them experience the consequences of their choices. My daughter would learn eventually what she had lost tonight. Whether she would learn in time to earn it back was no longer my concern. That was her choice.